I need to tell you something. Something that's been stuck in my head for weeks now, gnawing at me like a rat chewing through drywall. But before we get into all that, before the weirdness and the fear and whatever else is lurking in the shadows, I should probably start with how it all began. Because honestly, started out so normal. Just another chapter of life, nothing special. Or at least that's what I thought. So here's the deal. About 3 months ago, I moved into this little house on the edge of town. Not exactly glamorous, but hey, rent was cheap, and after years of couch surfing at friends' places or squeezing into shoebox apartments, I figured it was time to settle down. Plus, there was something kind of charming about the place. A creaky old porch, overgrown bushes framing the front yard, even a tiny attic space upstairs. It wasn't perfect, sure, but it felt mine. For once, I had somewhere to call home. Now, let me back up a bit, because I know what you're thinking. Why does this guy live alone in some random house? Well, first off, I'm not exactly the social butterfly type. Never have been. I've always preferred quiet nights with a book or binge-watching shows no one else cares about. And second, well, I work nights. Graveyard shifts, to be exact. Night owl by nature, insomniac by habit, you pick your label. Either way, working late suited me just fine. No noisy neighbors banging around during the day while I tried to sleep. No awkward small talk with coworkers who didn't understand why I hated mornings. Win-win, right? Anyway, the job itself wasn't anything exciting. Stockroom clerk at a local warehouse. Boring as hell, but steady paychecks kept the lights on. And trust me, when you're living paycheck to paycheck, boring beats unpredictable any day of the week. The hours were brutal, though. Midnight to 8 a.m., 5 days a week. Most people would lose their minds doing that, but like I said, I thrive at night. There's something peaceful about those empty streets, the world hushed under a blanket of darkness. During my drive home, the only sounds were the hum of my car engine and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. It was almost comforting, almost. But moving into this house, that was different. New territory for me. See, up until then, I'd never lived completely alone. Always roommates, family members, someone sharing the same roof. This time, though, it was just me. Just me and four walls that groaned whenever the temperature dropped. First, I loved it. Freedom, right? Cooking dinner at midnight without anyone complaining about the smell. Blasting music at full volume because who cares if the neighbors hear? Life felt good. Still, there were moments when the silence got to me. Like really got to me. Have you ever sat in a room so quiet you could swear you heard the dust settling? That's what it was like sometimes. And yeah, okay, maybe I imagined things a couple of times. A floorboard creaking when I knew I hadn't stepped anywhere near it. The faintest whisper of movement outside my window, even though I lived miles from anyone else. Stuff like that. But come on, it's an old house. Houses make noise. Everyone knows that, right? Looking back, I guess I should have paid more attention to those little signs. Should have listened harder when the noises didn't stop. But hindsight's 20/20, isn't it? Back then, I told myself it was nothing. Just my imagination running wild again. After all, I just moved in. Everything was still new, still unfamiliar. Of course, my brain was playing tricks on me. And then it happened. The first real sign that something wasn't right. Something I couldn't explain away with logic or reason. But we'll get to that later. For now, picture this. A quiet guy, trying to build a life in a sleepy little town, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Sounds pretty normal, doesn't it? Too bad normal doesn't last forever. Started small. So small, in fact, that I almost convinced myself it wasn't worth mentioning. Just little things, things you'd brush off if you weren't paying attention. But I noticed. Oh, I noticed. And looking back now, those tiny cracks in the foundation were the first signs that something was wrong. The first weird thing happened about a week after I moved in. I was unpacking some boxes in the living room when I heard it. A faint tapping sound coming from upstairs. At first, I thought it was just the house settling. Old houses do that, right? They groan and creak like they're alive, their wooden bones shifting with the changing weather. But this wasn't a groan or a creak. It was rhythmic, deliberate, like someone or something was knocking on the floorboards above me. I froze, my hands clutching the edge of an empty box. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing through the silence. No answer. Of course not. Who would be upstairs? The house was empty except for me. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My pulse quickened as I listened harder, straining to catch any hint of movement. After a few minutes of nothing but dead air, I shook my head and muttered under my breath, "Probably just the wind." But deep down, I didn't believe it. A couple of days later, I started noticing other things. Little things. Things that made me question whether I was losing my mind. For instance, there was this one night when I came home from work around 8 in the morning. Exhausted, I dropped my keys on the kitchen counter and headed straight for bed. When I woke up later that afternoon, the keys were gone. Not misplaced, they were gone. I searched everywhere. The counter, the couch cushions, even the pockets of my jacket. Nothing. Frustrated, I chalked it up to being too tired to remember where I'd left them. That is, until I found them sitting neatly on top of the coffee table the next morning. How had they gotten there? Had I sleepwalked? Or? I tried to laugh it off. "You're just stressed," I told myself. "Too many late nights messing with your brain." But the unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts like a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. Then there was the guy at work. Let's call him Carl. He worked the day shift, so our paths rarely crossed. But one morning, as I was clocking out, he stopped me near the break room. His eyes darted around nervously, like he was afraid someone might overhear us. "Hey," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Be careful, all right?" "Careful?" I frowned. "About what?" He hesitated, then shook his head. "Just don't stay too late. And whatever you do, don't go into the storage room by yourself." Before I could ask what he meant, he turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. What was that supposed to mean? Was he messing with me? Or did he know something I didn't? I shrugged it off at the time, figuring it was just some dumb prank or superstition passed around among the employees. But the way he'd looked at me, the fear in his eyes, it stuck with me. Something about it felt real. Back at home, the strange occurrences kept piling up. One evening, as I sat on the couch flipping through channels, I heard a soft thud from the hallway. It sounded like something heavy hitting the floor. I paused the TV and listened, my heart pounding in my chest. Silence. Slowly, I got up and crept toward the hallway, peering around the corner. Nothing. The hall was empty, the floor clear of anything that could have fallen. Yet the sensation of being watched prickled at the back of my neck, raising goosebumps along my arms. "I'm imagining things," I whispered aloud, trying to steady my breathing. "It's just stress. You're fine." But I wasn't fine. Not really. Every shadow seemed darker, every noise louder. Even the house itself felt different somehow, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The final straw came one particularly quiet night. I'd been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, unable to sleep. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of the floorboards. Then, without warning, I heard it again, that same tapping sound from before. Only this time it wasn't upstairs. It was closer, much closer, somewhere inside the walls. My blood ran cold. I sat bolt upright, gripping the edge of the mattress as the sound grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. Each knock reverberated through the room, sending shivers down my spine. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to sound brave. No response, just the relentless tapping, growing faster and more insistent. Panic bubbled up inside me, threatening to overwhelm my senses. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight app, scanning the walls for any sign of movement. Nothing, absolutely nothing, but the sound, it wouldn't stop. It echoed in my ears, drilling into my skull until I thought I might scream. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the tapping ceased. The sudden silence was deafening, pressing down on me like a weight. I sat there frozen, my chest heaving as I struggled to catch my breath. What the hell was that? Was it the house? Some kind of animal trapped in the walls? Or something else? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that room another second. Grabbing a blanket, I retreated to the living room and curled up on the couch, too shaken to even consider going back to bed. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, one thought kept circling through my mind. This wasn't over. Whatever it wasn't done with me yet. And somewhere deep down, I feared I already knew what was coming next. The next few days blurred together in a haze of sleeplessness and paranoia. After that night on the couch, I told myself it was all in my head, just stress manifesting as weird noises and misplaced objects. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the unease wouldn't leave me alone. It clung to me like a shadow, growing darker and heavier with each passing hour. And then, things got worse. It started with the lights. One evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table eating dinner. A sad microwave meal, nothing fancy, when the overhead bulb began to flicker. At first, I thought it was just old wiring acting up. The house was ancient, after all. But as I watched, the flickering grew erratic, pulsing faster and brighter until the entire room seemed to pulse with it. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. "Okay?" I muttered under my breath, trying to sound calm despite the knot tightening in my stomach. "This isn't normal." I stood up and walked over to the light switch, flipping it off and on again. Nothing changed. The bulb continued its frenzied dance, casting distorted shadows across the walls. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the flickering stopped. The light burned steady once more, leaving me standing there in stunned silence. But the strangest part? When I turned back to the table, my plate was gone. Gone. Vanished. Like it had never existed. I stared at the empty space where my dinner had been moments before, my heart hammering against my ribs. "What the hell?" I whispered, spinning around to check the floor, the counters, anywhere it might have fallen. Nothing. Not even crumbs. It was as if someone or something had taken it while I wasn't looking. But who? And why? My hands trembled as I grabbed my phone and called the only person I could think of. Carl. He'd warned me about staying late at work, about avoiding certain places. Maybe he knew something about this too. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up, his voice low and hesitant. "Yeah, Carl, it's me," I said quickly, pacing the length of the kitchen. "Look, I don't know what's going on, but stuff keeps happening. Weird stuff. Things disappearing. Lights freaking out. It's like the house is alive or something." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought he'd hung up. Then he sighed, his tone heavy with resignation. "Listen, man, I shouldn't be telling you this, but you're not the first person this has happened to." "What do you mean?" I demanded, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. He hesitated again, then lowered his voice even further. "That house you're living in, it's got a reputation. People say bad things happen there. Strange things. No one stays for long." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't want to scare you," he admitted. Besides, most people don't believe it until they experience it themselves. Just be careful, all right? Don't trust anything you see or hear. Before I could press him for more details, he hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in stunned silence. A reputation? Bad things? What did that even mean? And how was I supposed to protect myself from something I couldn't understand? Over the next few nights, the phenomena escalated rapidly. Shadows moved where they shouldn't, darting across the corners of my vision whenever I glanced away. Doors creaked open by themselves, even though I always made sure to lock them before bed. Once, I woke up in the middle of the night to find the bathroom mirror fogged over, words scrawled across the glass in jagged, uneven letters. Get out. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug. No, I whispered, shaking my head. This isn't real. This can't be real. I wiped at the mirror with trembling hands, smearing the condensation until the message disappeared. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just condensation. There hadn't been any steam, no source of moisture. Whatever had written those words wanted me to leave, and it was getting bolder. At work, things weren't much better. Carl avoided me completely now, refusing to meet my gaze whenever we crossed paths. Other co-workers acted strange too, whispering behind their hands when they thought I wasn't listening. One afternoon, as I was stocking shelves in the storage room, I overheard two of them talking near the doorway. "He looks pale," one of them said quietly, "like he hasn't slept in days." "He won't last long," the other replied, her voice tinged with pity. "None of them do." I froze, my blood running cold. They were talking about me, about what was happening to me. Slowly, I set down the box I'd been holding and stepped into view, forcing a smile onto my face. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" They both jumped, startled, then exchanged guilty glances. "Oh, yeah," the first guy stammered. "Just, work stuff, right?" I said, narrowing my eyes. "Work stuff." Neither of them said another word as I brushed past them and headed for the break room. My hands shook as I poured myself a cup of coffee, my mind racing. How did they know? What did they know? And why wouldn't they tell me? By the end of the week, I was barely functioning. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those words on the mirror, heard the tapping in the walls. During the day, I jumped at every sound, convinced something was watching me. Even outside the house, I couldn't escape the feeling of being followed. Every shadow seemed longer, every noise louder. I was unraveling, piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. One particularly bad night, I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. Armed with a flashlight and a baseball bat I dug out of the garage, I prowled through the house, checking every room, every closet, every corner. Everything seemed normal, at least as normal as it ever did these days. But as I climbed the stairs to the second floor, I felt it. That same oppressive weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. The hallway stretched ahead of me, impossibly long, the air thick with an unnatural chill. My flashlight beam wavered as I pointed it toward the end of the hall, illuminating the door to the attic. It was closed, just like I'd left it earlier that day. But as I approached, I realized something was wrong. The handle was turning slowly, inch by inch, as if an invisible hand were twisting it from the other side. "No," I breathed, taking a step back. "No, no, no." The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. My chest tightened, panic clawing at my throat. For a moment, I considered running. But where would I go? This was my home, or at least it was supposed to be. If I left now, I'd be abandoning everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I stepped forward, raising the flashlight and peering into the attic. At first, I saw nothing but dust-covered boxes and cobwebs. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of movement, a figure standing just beyond the reach of the light. Tall, thin, its features obscured by shadow. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. Instead, it tilted its head slightly, as if studying me. Then, without warning, it lunged. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight as terror overwhelmed me. The light rolled across the floor, casting wild, jerky shadows on the walls. In the chaos, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. Dozens of eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, watching me from every direction. And then silence, complete and utter silence. When I finally managed to crawl out of the attic, gasping for air, I realized something. The house wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it wasn't done with me yet. I didn't know how long I'd been crouched on the attic floor, trembling like a leaf. My flashlight lay shattered nearby, its beam flickering weakly before dying completely. Darkness swallowed me whole, pressing against my skin like a living thing. The air was freezing now, so cold it burned my lungs with every ragged breath. But worse than the cold was the sound, the unmistakable echo of footsteps above me. Wait, above me? The attic was the highest point in the house. There was nothing above it but the roof. Yet there they were, clear as day, pounding against the wooden beams like someone or something was pacing back and forth. Each step reverberated through the structure, shaking loose bits of plaster that rained down around me. "No," I whispered, clutching the baseball bat tighter. "This isn't real. This can't be happening." But it was, and it wasn't stopping. The footsteps grew louder, faster, more deliberate. Then came the creak, the unmistakable groan of weight shifting on the roof. Something was moving up there, climbing, searching. For me, my mind raced, panic clawing at the edges of my thoughts. I had to get out, had to move, but where? Every exit felt impossibly far away, every shadow a potential threat. My legs screamed in protest as I forced myself to stand, stumbling toward the attic door. The handle felt icy under my palm, slick with sweat or something else I didn't want to think about. As I yanked the door open, a deafening crash echoed from behind me. I spun around just in time to see one of the support beams splinter apart, shards of wood flying in all directions. A figure emerged from the wreckage, tall and skeletal, its limbs unnaturally long and jointed like an insect's. Its face, if you could call it that, was a blur of shifting shadows, void of any recognizable features except for those glowing eyes. Dozens of them staring straight at me. "Oh God!" I choked out, backing away as fast as I could. "What are you?" It didn't answer. Instead, it lunged again, faster this time, its movements jerky and unnatural. I barely managed to dodge, throwing myself into the hallway as the creature slammed into the doorway, tearing chunks of drywall from the frame. Dust filled the air, choking me as I scrambled to my feet and bolted down the stairs. Every step felt like running through molasses, my body sluggish with fear. Behind me, the thing let out a guttural screech that rattled the windows and sent shivers down my spine. It was gaining on me, fast. "The front door!" I shouted to myself, desperation fueling my legs. Just make it to the front door. But when I reached the foyer, I froze. The front door was gone. In its place was a solid wall, smooth and unbroken as if it had always been there. My stomach dropped. This wasn't possible. None of this was possible. "Think!" I hissed, spinning around wildly. The kitchen? No, the windows were boarded up too. The back door? Same story. Every escape route had vanished, leaving me trapped inside this nightmare. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Slow, deliberate, and getting closer. The footsteps stopped. For a moment, the house was deathly silent. So quiet I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then came the whisper. Low, guttural, and impossibly close. It wasn't words, not exactly. More like fragments of sound stitched together into something that shouldn't exist. The voice slithered through the air, wrapping itself around me like icy fingers. Leave. It hissed, right beside my ear. I spun around, swinging the baseball bat wildly, but there was nothing there. Just empty space where the creature, or whatever it was, should have been. My breaths came in shallow gasps as I backed away, my mind screaming at me to run, to do something. But where? Every door, every window, every possible escape route had vanished. The house had turned into a prison, its walls shifting and twisting to keep me inside. And then I remembered the basement. It was the only place I hadn't checked, the one part of the house I'd avoided since moving in. Something about it had always felt wrong, like it didn't belong. But now, with no other options left, I bolted toward the kitchen, yanking open the trapdoor beneath the sink. A wave of damp, musty air hit me as I peered down into the darkness below. The narrow wooden stairs groaned under my weight as I descended, each step creaking louder than the last. At the bottom, I found myself in a cramped, unfinished space lit only by the faint glow of an ancient bulb dangling from the ceiling. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with jars of preserves and tools covered in rust. In the far corner stood an old iron door, its surface corroded and warped with age. Without thinking, I ran to it, pulling with all my strength until the hinges screamed in protest and the door finally swung open. Beyond it was a tunnel, a narrow passageway carved out of dirt and stone. It smelled of earth and decay, the air thick enough to choke on. But it was a way out, my only way out. I plunged into the darkness, stumbling over roots and rocks as I followed the winding path deeper underground. Behind me, I could hear the house collapsing in on itself, the walls buckling and beams snapping like twigs. Dust filled the tunnel, choking me as I crawled forward on hands and knees. Finally, after what felt like hours, I emerged into the cold night air, coughing and gasping for breath. When I looked back, the house was gone. In its place was an empty lot, overgrown with weeds and surrounded by trees. No sign remained of the structure that had nearly claimed my life. It was as if it had never existed at all. Days passed, then weeks. I moved out of town, leaving everything behind except the clothes on my back and the memories I couldn't shake. Sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes staring back at me. The whispers haunted my dreams, echoing in the spaces between thoughts. Was it real? Had any of it been real? Or had I simply lost my mind? Carl stopped answering my calls after that night. When I went to the warehouse looking for him, his co-workers claimed they'd never seen him before. Carl who? One of them asked, shrugging indifferently. Even stranger, none of them seemed surprised when I described the events leading up to my escape. They just nodded knowingly, their expressions grim. "You're lucky," one of them said quietly. "Most people don't make it out." But did I really escape? Some nights, when the wind picks up and the shadows stretch long across my new apartment, I swear I can still hear it, the tapping. Soft at first, almost imperceptible, but growing louder with each passing second. And sometimes, late at night, I catch a glimpse of movement in the reflection of my bedroom window. A figure standing just beyond the glass, watching me. Was it all in my head? Or is something still out there, waiting for me to return? I thought I'd forget it all once I left. thought distance would dull the fear, erase the scars etched into my soul. But now every shadow feels like it's watching me. Every noise makes me jump. I tell myself it's paranoia, leftover trauma from what happened. But deep down, I know better. Because somewhere, buried beneath the lies and rationalizations, I remember the truth. That house wasn't just haunted. It was alive. And it's not done with me yet.